The greatest of all of the reform movements was no doubt the abolitionist movement, the movement to end slavery. When you look at the trend that slavery had followed during the Revolution, it was believed by so many that it would gradually decrease the number of slaves, and that states on their own, without being mandated to abolish slavery by the federal government, that states would just do that. Well, the 1790s marked sort of a turning point in that downward trend in the use of slave labor when the cotton gin was invented and the textile mills really took off in the Northeast. That became extremely profitable, and cotton as a cash crop, white gold as it became called, that expanded very rapidly into the American deep South, farther and farther west. So, as slavery grew, so did the opposition to slavery. So let's discuss that pattern. By the 1820s, America had its first formal abolitionist societies in the republic stage. There were abolitionist societies in the colonial stage, but the American Colonization Society formed in the 1820s, and this was a solution to end slavery by having slavery abolished and having slaves sent back to Africa. Now, this was a pretty powerful movement, and the American Colonization Society sort of pioneered that concept. As a matter of fact, on the west coast of Africa, Liberia and Sierra Leone were established as sort of like safe havens for Africans who had formerly been in slavery in other countries, primarily America. Now, that was not successful on a large scale. This whole resettlement concept was so many of the abolitionist leaders understood that these new slaves represented a new kind of slave. The international slave trade was banned in the early 1800s. So most slaves in the 1820s, 30s, and then as the decades progress are American born. They really have no strong connection with the African continent. They're born here in America. And even furthermore, many of these slaves born in America are fathered by white planter men, and so, or white men. So that's not a real solution to abolition. And of course, free blacks consider themselves American, and very few of them are willing to immigrate. So that's not really a viable solution. Know what the word abolition means? That word means to outlaw slavery. William Lloyd Garrison founds one of the first what's considered radical abolitionist organizations in America. It is the New England Anti-Slavery Society and also the American Anti-Slavery Society. The Liberator issues its first publication in 1830. Okay, the Liberator's first publication is in 1830. This is considered a radical publication because it calls for the immediate, not gradual, but immediate emancipation of slaves based on morality, based on it being wrong. Okay, don't forget the influence of the Second Great Awakening, morality, and what is considered Christian and right and wrong according. So we can see the influence of the Second Great Awakening here. William Lloyd Garrison was raised by a devout Methodist mother. And her influence on his perspective about right and wrong and morality was extremely powerful. He joined the Colonization Society. He joined the anti-slavery movement under the Colonization Society originally in the 1820s, and he helped to print some of their publications. But as he learned more and more about slavery and his ideas became more cemented, he he threw off that colonization idea and called for the immediate emancipation, or the word emancipate means to free. Okay, another, and I did not mention previously, but William Lloyd Garrison is white. David Walker, on the other hand, is a black abolitionist. He's a tailor, and one of the ways that he covertly spreads his message is his literature that he's produced. It's a call to blacks of the world, a call to blacks of the world. He advocates for a violent overthrow of slavery, that blacks of the world should rise up and take what is theirs, their freedom and their natural right. David Walker, he takes his pamphlet and he will sew it in the seams of tailor suits, sailor suits. Being a tailor, he sews it in the seams of sailor suits, and he's able to spread these abolitionist ideas in a very covert manner that way. So he's not only an abolitionist, but he's also a civil rights activist. His rhetoric is that of equality. Okay, even free black people in the United States of America are paid a lower wage, and they're reserved to the lowest of jobs as far as skill. And if you look at it on a caste system, they're not given the freedoms of economic mobility and equality of opportunity. Okay, and then there's Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass represents another class of slaves. He and Harriet Tubman fall in the same class of abolitionists. They are slaves, or born slaves, and Frederick Douglass is able to escape slavery. He's a runaway, and he was educated a little on the plantation. His mistress taught him a little bit about reading and writing, and then he was able to grow that by really tricking the white boys on the plantation to show him a little bit more about letters, etc. So he's considered to be self-taught, literate, can read and write, and that helps him to forge papers and escape. He's married to a free black woman in Baltimore, runs away, ends up in New York, joins an abolitionist community, writes his own biography and autobiography, Frederick Douglass, and he's so connected, and he's a part of the slave system. So his speaking at anti-slavery conventions is extremely moving, and he has a great deal of impact on breaking down these stereotypes that blacks aren't capable of learning, they're not capable of thinking for themselves, they're not capable of functioning in society. There's a lot of pseudoscience at this time that sanctions really racist and prejudiced beliefs, pseudoscience, and like measuring the skulls of black people and advocating that, or teaching that they don't have the innate biological abilities to function equally in the American society. Douglass partners with William Lloyd Garrison, for a while, and works on the Liberator. As Garrison's beliefs become more radical, Frederick Douglass parts ways with Garrison and continues his publication, The North Star. It does call for the immediate abolition of slavery, but Douglass does not adhere to violence as a means to that end. The slave population has grown drastically, as you can see from the numbers here, between 1810 and 1830. Cotton is the reason why. And we understand the arduous laboring conditions that slaves work under. Urban slaves, or slaves in the city, have a bit more freedom, but they do not have equality, and they suffer discrimination and prejudice, and a caste system that deprives them of social mobility. Nat Turner's rebellion occurs in 1831. Nat Turner, like Frederick Douglass, was taught to read and write by his mistress. Turner, though, is another important product of the Second Great Awakening. He is a minister. He's taught to read, and he reads and interprets the Bible. He's allowed by his master to sort of tour neighboring plantations and preach to slave populations in Virginia. And as he becomes exposed more and more to not just the oppressions and evils of slavery, but the sheer brutality of slavery, his ideas become more and more radical, and his interpretation of scripture gradually changes, and he becomes enlightened and inspired by scripture. And he says he undergoes some revelations, and he leads a slave uprising in 1831. Turner and slaves on his plantation in Northampton, Virginia, kill their master in the night, and then they travel from that one plantation to other neighboring plantations, and this lasts about 2 weeks. Nat Turner grows an army with pitchforks and some rifles that they've gathered from some of the farms that they've sacked and taken. So this frightens many people in Virginia, and of course they debate abolition after Nat Turner's rebellion. But the state of Virginia, the legislature there votes to not abolish slavery, but to change the laws to be more restrictive. It becomes illegal to teach a slave to read and write. It's enforced very heavily that slaves have passes as they travel throughout the state. So it also becomes illegal for a black minister to preach to a black congregation without a white person present. So that's sort of the backlash from the uprising. And there are other uprisings that were planned, but Nat Turner's rebellion was successfully executed. And as Southern society holds on to slavery more and more, and slavery becomes entrenched, the defenses for slavery just grow. The Bible is used as a defense for slavery. Paul references that slaves obey your masters. But then those abolitionists also use the Bible to advocate for slavery's end. They also use the myth of the happy slave. You listen to the slaves sing. They're obviously very happy. The slave or the plantation society is a harmonious, equally beneficial relationship. And they argue that slaves in America have a life better than that on the African continent. Southern congressmen secure the adoption of a gag rule. We're talking about Congress of the United States of America in 1936 secured a gag rule, so you could not even talk about slavery. You could not even mention legislation for abolition. That was a huge win for Southerners, so it protected them against the talk of abolition in the Congress of the United States of America.